All right, everybody, welcome to the Daily Pay webinar. My name is Carl. I'm going to be the MC for your host, I'm going to be the MC for the affair. Let's try that. Thanks very much for joining us. We hope you're having a great day wherever you're joining from. Today's Daily Pay webinar is entitled The Payroll Revolution. Before I turn it over to our host, Josh, I just want to reiterate that we'll be using the GoToWebinar control panel for asking questions today. We'll capture your questions as they come in, so please feel free to ask them at any point. We do have some frequently asked questions that we'd like to cover with Felicia today, so we'll do our best to get around to all the questions that do come in. If we don't get a chance to answer your question today, we will be able to follow up with you on email afterwards and make sure that you get all the information that you need. Also, keep an eye on your chat box within the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll be using that to share some helpful articles during the presentation today. And with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to our host, Josh Jackson. Josh?
Thanks a lot, Carl. Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Jackson, Director of Product Marketing at DailyPay. I'll be the host today for the On-Demand Pay webinar. On-Demand Pay has been at the forefront of discussion this year. You may have seen an article this weekend in the Wall Street Journal called "The Wait for Payday Doesn't Have to Be So Long." In fact, my colleague Carl is going to share that link with the the webinar participants in the chat right now. In the article, the writer says payday has been evolving. Functions that once took days or weeks, such as tabulating workers' hours and withholdings, are now automated and calculated in minutes with software and mobile apps. Paychecks that used to crawl through the mail can now arrive digitally through direct deposit, but payday could still be faster. This is a problem that everyone seems to know that we need to solve, and the solution is faster payroll through employer, both services and systems. But the Wall Street Journal article is also right to point out that both the frequency of paychecks and the way they move are hard to change. And I'm sure many on the webinar today are acutely aware of that fact. Data from the Wall Street Journal shows that 60% of U.S. private businesses pay employees roughly every 2 weeks for work. And that's according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Another 5% of businesses pay monthly, and then there's also weekly and bi-monthly payroll as well. Here at DailyPay, we built a platform that enables companies to break from the two types of payroll cycles and augment existing payroll systems to offer daily pay to employees without changing existing payroll timing and funding. As you might imagine, the rise of on-demand pay systems like DailyPay has caused a stir in the industry and created a lot of questions about how this fundamental change will impact the payroll industry and the professionals who manage payroll systems. So to talk more about what this change will, how this change will impact payroll, we've invited our good friend Felicia Cheek, Principal Advisor at Omnia Global Partners, to join us for this webinar and share her point of view on what it means for the industry. Hi, Felicia.
Hi, and thank you for having me.
For those on the webinar who might not know, have your background, could you give us a brief introduction of yourself and your experience?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Felicia Cheek, and I am a principal advisor at the Omnia Global Partners Group. We focus on payroll, and I have spent the last more time than I care to say, but at least 25 years, really focusing on payroll, really helping companies with their payroll strategy, leverage best practices, and just make payroll a more value-added function for the organization. So I'm excited today to talk to you about daily payments and the impact that they will have on payroll and the value that we will be bringing to our employee population.
Thanks a lot, Felicia. And I've talked a lot about the recent Wall Street Journal article already, but I wanted to shift to another article that we recently wrote for the American Payroll Association blog called "Scared of Inevitable Daily Pay Benefits." My colleague Carl is going to share that link in the chat again right now. But I think a good place to lead off would be, Felicia, in your view, why is the concept of on-demand pay viewed as scary for payroll professionals when they first hear about an on-demand pay platform?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And we see a lot of times when we talk to payroll professionals or anyone, there is a certain amount of fear. And sometimes I'm talking to people and we're not going to do that. That doesn't work at our organization. But what I see is really a lack of information and understanding. It's most of the time because we look at payroll and we think about the way we process it today. So when you hear daily payments, you're not hearing daily payments. What you're hearing is we've got to process payroll, we've got to withhold deductions, and we have to pay taxes every single day. And you also have in the back of your mind that we are struggling, or I should say challenged, to do that every 2 weeks or whatever our pay frequency is. So how in the world do you think we're going to be able to do this on a daily basis? So that's the biggest concern. Again, it's just really lack of information and understanding. And even if we look and we think about some of the things that have evolved in the last few years, just think a while back, direct deposit was very a concept. And a lot of people were not open to direct deposit and, just being able to trust the banking system to pay our employees on payday. And now, as you know, more and more employees, a lot of companies have almost 100% direct deposit. And then we came up with pay cards. And pay cards were, companies could not imagine having their employees use pay cards to receive their payments. And now it's a natural part of direct deposit for lots of organizations. So I say that to say, and this is one of the things that we say at Omnia Global Partners, is everything changes and we have to change with it. We have to be prepared to change with it. So that's really how we have to look at daily payments. We need not be afraid of the concept.
That's really helpful background. And just to give us a sense and give our listeners a sense, how much are your clients asking about on-demand pay right now, and how far in advance are they sort of thinking in terms of how payroll is evolving and when they'll want to make a change or start to think about on-demand pay platforms for their organizations?
Yeah, so great, two questions. And so when we think about how much we're hearing companies ask about daily payments, I am starting to hear about it more and more. And I really think I would divide my clients into 50% ask because of the industry they're in. And so they've got a lot of employees that are asking them because they're seeing it. And then we have maybe another 50% that ask because they are strategic and they are forward thinking and they're looking at things to implement in their payroll strategy that really will move their organization ahead. And as you know, every company is really focusing on the employee experience and talent. And so from a payroll perspective, we have become more than a processing area. More and more payroll organizations are looking at how we add value to the broader organization. So from those two perspectives, some because of the industry that they're in, it's just a lot more common, and some because they want to be strategic. And when we start to think about the timeline, even when we're looking at long-term planning, it used to be 3 to 5 years. Now that is really pulled in a lot because as you can see with things like digitization, RPA, chatbots, cloud technology, all of those things moved really, really quick. And we're seeing quite a bit of change in our environment, and it's coming quicker and quicker. So from a daily pay perspective and just, any type of new payment options to employees, we're starting to look at that a lot closer. And we realize that the change is going to come a lot quicker than some of the change that we've experienced in the past.
That's really helpful background. What typically drives a decision to try on-demand pay for the organizations that you're hearing from? Is it a company's overall payroll strategy? Is it a concern for a company's employee population? Or is it something else or a combination of factors?
Yeah, so it's really a combination of all of that. when we think about daily payments for your employees, there's a couple things. It's something that will be executed through the payroll organization. And so as we think about from a payroll perspective, it's really about your payroll strategy. And as I mentioned before, your ability to influence the employee experience. There's also another view from a competitive advantage. And so as more and more companies focus on talent management and retention, you will see daily payment being one of those things that a company can offer to their employees. If everything else is equal and an employee or a candidate is deciding between a company that everything is equal, but a company that offers daily payments and one that does not offer daily payments, you pretty much can guess what will be the driver in helping make that decision. So from a talent perspective, we're seeing it become more and more a part of that process. And then the other thing that we're seeing is employee from a benefit perspective. It is an employee benefit, and as companies, you can read a lot of articles, the Wall Street Journal article that you mentioned before. Employee financial well-being is becoming more and more top of mind for companies. So as you can see, or as we all probably have experienced, our earnings have not necessarily kept up with the pace of inflation. And so that being the case, employee financial well-being is not necessarily in all cases because of employee can't plan adequately, but sometimes there are real needs. The other thing is when we talk about employee financial well-being, which I think is really important, it's a really important component of this, you can't look at employees in your organization and clearly identify who's a candidate or who will take advantage of a daily payment. It could be someone with a one-time occurrence, or it could be someone that is paid a minimum wage or low wages, but you can't really tell that by looking across your employee population.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Felicia. I thought I'd share just a few thoughts on how we at DailyPay think about sort of key features of an on-demand pay platform that are needed to optimize the employee experience. And I'll just kind of walk through what some of those are from our perspective. So first and foremost, you want to have continuous coverage, meaning 24/7, around the clock, 365, weekends, holidays coverage for when an employee has a need for money before payday that he or she has already earned. So this is, for example, a nurse gets off a 12-hour shift at midnight and has a bill due that they need to use their earnings for. He or she can access those earnings on a continuous basis. We feel that's a key sort of feature of a program that you need to have in place. The program also should provide full visibility for the employee into what his or her true earned wages up until that point is. In order for an effective sort of budgeting strategy of what those earnings might be used for, they need full visibility into what they can expect on payday. Universal access, this means access via any bank account or any pay card, so that there are no populations within your employee group for which you cannot provide the benefit. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, you want a platform that's simple to use. So something that is not going to be sort of confused with other tools and mixed in with other employee benefits. We at DailyPay feel that you should have a very simple employee experience that's transparent to the employee and also is most simple for the employer to implement as a standalone benefit. Felicia, how do you feel communicating something like this to employees? what's the best strategy? Is it that a product that has a lot of uses and features, or do you feel that a simple, focused solution which gives access to funds in sort of a transparent way and in a way that's open to all is the best way to go?
Yeah, I think a simple, focused solution that grants access to everyone. Again, I think one of the biggest mistakes that you can make in deciding to make this available to your employees is to determine what employee population is going to use this feature. So that would be, I think, the best way or the most optimal way to actually introduce it to your employees.
Thanks for that perspective. And I just wanted to remind the audience that you can ask questions at any point using the questions box in your control panel. So feel free to send any questions that might be coming to mind, as you have them. Felicia, from a technology standpoint, what does this new technology mean for the payroll industry? What processes will stay the same, and what processes will need to change for a payroll manager or a payroll team who is, thinking about an on-demand pay benefit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so when we think about our payroll process, most organizations are focusing or should be focusing on simplification, automation, and standardization. So with those things, DailyPay doesn't mean that you are going to need to make a lot of changes to your process. So if we look at some of the things that we're doing, or some of the things that you guys are probably thinking about from a technology perspective, there is an additional interface, but that interface will contain the hours worked. So it's something that you're doing anyway. Also, from a process efficiency perspective, one of the biggest areas, and when I talk to organizations, we think a lot about payroll, and we think about what are the drivers of payroll issues. And a lot of times, well, most of the time, time is the key error, or I should say the key area that compromises accuracy in payroll. So one of the things, since you are actually paying employees for the hours that they have actually worked, the time will need to be accurate. You'll really need to leverage some of the best practices that I know lots of companies strive to do, but in actuality, they're not always done. So one of the things that you'll need to do to ensure that your time is accurate and all of your employees can have usage of this feature is you will want your employees to enter their time daily, but you will also want your managers to approve time daily. And generally, in most organizations, employees are entering their time daily. Where we have the challenges is having managers to approve the time daily. So those are some of the things when you think about this. Change management is always a big component of any changes or any new features that you add to your organization. So you have to keep that in mind. That's probably the biggest area. From a tax perspective, I mentioned before, you are not paying taxes every day. So you don't have to worry about that. But one of the things you do need to make sure that you do is that you're making your adjustments to your payroll timely. So any of your adjustments that impact taxes need to be made on a timely basis. You should be doing that anyway, but sometimes we do it on a quarterly basis, but you want to look at that again on a regular basis so that if there are any impacts to an employee's pay, you can have that in the system immediately. So you don't want to wait until the end of the quarter. From a garnishment perspective, one of the best practices, and most companies are doing this, is you want to automate that process. So you want to use EIWO, and you want to make sure that you've got that process automated. And one of the things I don't think that I've mentioned before, we may have mentioned it, Josh may have mentioned it earlier, but for this feature to work, or this benefit, you will have to set up a profile. So one of the things that you'll have to do at the initiation is you'll have to look at your employee population and determine if you have employees that have garnishments or other deductions that may fluctuate. how you're going to account for that. Are you going to, let them withdraw funds on a daily basis or every day, or are you going to put some padding in so that they, that you will have the funds that you need to cover those deductions like garnishments or anything else that may come up. So it does require from you, as in, as with any new feature or functionality, it does require an initial setup. And there's some analysis that you'll have to do. That will be pretty easy once you get in and start to look at your analytical data. Other than that, your process should be seamless. The employee will have the benefit of this feature without you making major changes to your process in payroll.
That's a great point, Felicia. And I just add that I think it's very important for participants to scrutinize really the product design of various on-demand pay platforms, because we see different platforms utilizing different ways to account for edge case scenarios like you mentioned, garnishments or other scenarios. So here at DailyPay, we try to be flexible and open to working with you and really have that conversation early on in the process about what system is going to actually work best for you. Give the employer the ability to define the parameters of the program that they want to put into place, rather than sort of have a vendor dictated kind of way of going about things. So it's very I think important that payroll teams kind of identify those points that they have about their population that they want us to know early on in the process. So in terms of sort of areas of management, Felicia, in HR and in some other areas of organizations, you can kind of try a lot of different things out when you're trying new benefits, but in payroll, it's really where rubber hits the road, right? So we can't really afford to get things wrong. You only really have one shot to get it right. So I just wanted to ask your thoughts on what this implies about choosing vendors and evaluating different on-demand pay platforms when you're thinking about it.
Yeah, and that's really important. And so as we start to look at DailyPay, and remember, initially I talked a lot about education. So one of the things that you need to understand is there are several different models. Actually, there's two primary models, and one is a vendor-funded model, and the other is an employer-funded model. The vendor-funded model, definitely offers a benefit to the employee, but also the focus is on minimizing the risk to the employer. And then from an employer-funded model, again, there is a benefit to the employee. The risk to the employer is a little bit bigger. So as the leader of the payroll organization, when you start to hear about this, you start to look at it, you want to make sure that you are familiar with and comfortable with those two models so that you can make a recommendation that works really well for your company.
That's very helpful background, and I'll just add a few thoughts from a product design sort of perspective on that. When you're structuring a benefit for your employee base, our thoughts at DailyPay are, you should consider for the employer-funded model in particular, not only the payroll edge cases that we've already mentioned, like garnishments and different tax rates for different employees, et cetera, but also, the implications on tax withholdings, on pay stub compliance, and the cost of capital for your business of putting the funds out yourselves rather than having the vendor fund those. And then on the vendor funded side, it's a question of how involved do you want yourselves to be in the kind of process of repaying the vendor. Here at DailyPay, we try to segregate the employer's payroll team from the repayment process to the vendor, which we think is very important. But equally, you want to avoid sort of being in a category like the direct-to-consumer models that have faced increased consumer finance sensitivity and scrutiny in recent months. The key here is avoiding the direct debiting of employee bank accounts, which can kind of get into the space of where payday lenders have operated for many years, and with increased scrutiny on the payday lending and payday advance industry recently, it may be something worth considering. When you're choosing a payback method, ensuring that you're equally not asking the vendor to go out and do certain practices that have been scrutinized and questioned, but also not involving yourselves too much in the process, where you're doing being involved in the actual repayment to the vendor. So that's just a kind of a teaser of some content that if you want to explore deeper, we highly recommend at DailyPay. Felicia, switching topics a little bit, how can payroll professionals actually embrace on-demand pay? What are concrete actions that they can take in order to sort of join this movement and become part of what's changing in the landscape?
So that's a really good question and a great point. So I think a few years ago, a lot of outside of payroll a lot of people did not say payroll and strategy in the same sentence. It's, payroll is very transactional. It's a have to have. But as we start to look at payroll with all of the changes we've had around automation and digitization, payroll is definitely becoming more and more an area where there's lots of data, lots of information, and you have the ability to use that to impact the employee experience. So one of the things that I would say to you in, looking at daily payments is you need to understand it so you can decide if it is something that will work in your organization and how you want to make it work. You also need to look at the value proposition for your payroll organization. So if you step back and look at your payroll organization, how you process payroll, how your employees see your organization, what's your value, what's your contribution to the company above and beyond paying employees every 2 weeks or on the pay period. The other thing you want to look at is in your organization, what role does the payroll organization play in the employee experience? Payroll is definitely a part of that employee experience, because if everything goes right from the point of hire to everything else that happens, and as an employee, I don't get paid correctly or timely, my experience is not good. And so think about the role that payroll plays in really setting up a good employee experience. As a payroll leader, you always want to be proactive in your thinking. You want to understand this again, and you want to be able to understand it well enough so that you can dispel any myths that are any preconceived myths about daily payments. It's really up to you to understand and communicate that information. Again, ultimately, the decision is up to your organization, whether or not it's a benefit that you want to offer your employees. But as a payroll leader, make sure that you are fully educated and understand the implications, the risk, as well as the benefit.
That's very helpful perspective, Felicia. And I think you mentioned about reducing turnover and about the organizational benefit of on-demand pay platforms and daily payment platforms. We see that as sort of the main benefit to the overall enterprise or business when we're talking to our prospects and our clients about how how they're thinking about this benefit. How would you guide users to evaluate that claim? For example, would you want to see data that demonstrate reduced turnover? Would you want to see, a certain profile of an organization when you're sort of evaluating them as an on-demand pay platform?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And so as we talk about it, payroll again, and I said this before, payroll will execute. HR will benefit because it will help with talent, attract talent and retain talent. Benefits also benefits because there is an additional benefit that they can add to the employee experience. So we're looking at it from a payroll perspective, but there's lots of organizational benefits. So it is something that you want to work with those organizations. And I will also say that as a payroll leader, if you don't decide to do it, you may hear from your talent group that, hey, this is something we want to look at, or also from benefits that, hey, this is something we want to look at. So, as much as you can, understand it and embrace it, because it will, if it doesn't come from you, it more than likely will come from somewhere else. There's lots of organizations that have implemented daily payments that have talked about, and obviously this varies by industry, but that have talked about the impact that it's had on turnover, on retention, being able to really attract employees. I gave an example before. If everything is equal, sometimes what actually makes a decision for a prospective employee is the fact that your company has a benefit where they can get paid daily. And as we think about the gig economy and, what our new workforce looks like, we are going to start to see not just things like daily payments, but we're also going to start to see different methods of payment. There's lots of talk about, digital payments like Google Pay, Apple Pay, just things that are a lot different from what we have traditionally seen in the past. So be open to it, and I can't express enough, educate yourself on it. It may be good for your organization, it may not, but at least you know how it works and what the benefits are.
That's very helpful, Felicia. I think before we open it up to audience questions, and all members of the audience, do feel free to use the chat function in your webinar to send us questions. I wanted you, Felicia, to give us your perspective on the general climate of the payroll industry, and where do we go from here? What are sort of the on the horizon? What do you see as the general next steps for the industry?
Yeah, so when we're talking about where payroll is going, automation and digitization are really driving payroll. So as we start thinking about, our processes, how we're automating, how we're leveraging cloud technology, how we're using robotic process automation, really moving the payroll organization from a highly transactional part of the company to a lot more analytical. Think of all the data that we have in payroll and how you're going to be able to use that information. So a couple of things as a leader of the payroll organization, what is your payroll strategy? How do you plan to implement or execute on that strategy? Digitization, automation, simplification, all of that should be a part of your strategy. A couple of years ago, we were talking about RPA, robotic process automation. Not a lot of organizations were doing it. Now today, we talk about robotic process automation, and almost every organization is either doing it, and you're using it for reconciliation and balancing and other parts of the payroll process, or you're using chatbots to control your volumes in your employee service center. And so you just have to think that way, think outside of the box, and how you are going to be delivering payroll services, how you're going to make that easy, and how you're going to leverage technology. Don't be surprised if you're, offering direct deposit, pay cards, Apple Pay, Google Pay, Cash App for the actual payroll payments in the future.
I think that's a sort of an excellent place to probably just, kind of turn towards audience questions, Felicia. And so, looking at some questions that have come in, Julie was asking, I think she was asking two questions really. One is around whether states are requiring this, meaning daily payments. There are no sort of requirements around that, but she's also asking, are you stating that the employer has an option to do daily pay themselves? And I thought, Felicia, you could, kind of speak to that portion.
So I want to just make sure that I understand that. We're saying, does the employer have the option to do daily payments themselves? If I understand that correctly, the question is, without a vendor, you absolutely can. But then, as I understand, and one of the things that I will say early on is you always want to talk to your legal counsel before making any decisions. But as far as I know, and you would be doing a regular payroll every day, and you would just be processing a payroll. I don't know that there's an option, and obviously I don't know everything. There's an option to do daily payments as an employer without an external vendor. And I don't know, maybe that's something that Josh, you can shed a little bit more light on.
Yeah, so I agree. So there's really two ways you could, kind of go about it. One is utilizing an external third-party vendor, and the other, as you say, Felicia, would be sort of the literal running payroll daily in-house, which for a lot of professionals on the line might not sound like an appealing option. So what we do here at DailyPay is we try to create what we think of as a synthetic daily payroll for the end user, i.e. they can go to work 8 hours, and access 8 hours worth of earnings at the end of the day, without changing the payroll process of the organization of the enterprise. So we kind of really feel like that's the easiest way for a payroll team to implement this benefit. Payroll teams, can make elections on their own, but that's sort of our feeling about it. Another question in this sort of the same vein was around how is DailyPay and how are third-party vendors staying on top of changing regulations and state-specific regulations as our sort of on-demand pay industry becomes more popular and widely used? That's a question from Kim. So Kim, we here at DailyPay really feel like product design and having a product that complies with all laws in all 50 states and changes as little about how the payroll process really takes place at your organization, while also keeping in mind consumer finance considerations, is the most important and the best way to go about this. So it's really, on the one hand, you don't want a vendor who is going to be engaging in practices that result in non-sufficient funds fees or sort of bad outcomes for your employee base. And on the other hand, you want to make sure that you're not overly involved in, as I just mentioned, the functions of running payroll every day. So it's sort of a bit of a Goldilocks situation where you want to make sure you get it just right. And that's kind of how we approach things here at DailyPay. Another question from the audience, from John, and this one's probably good for you, Felicia, is what types of employees commonly are you seeing use this benefit?
So remember before, I think that's a really good question. Before I mentioned that you really can't tell who the employees are. However, there are certain industries where we see more employees that that may be good candidates, right? And so when you're looking at the wages, sometimes in hospitality and retail, there are maybe you have more employees, but I would encourage you not necessarily to look at the type of employee, but whether or not the benefit is a good fit for your organization, because you may have an employee that's considered highly paid and they have something that happens that puts them in a situation where this is a benefit that they would use. So kind of look beyond the type of employee, the wages that the employee makes, and again, consider the impact of the benefit to your organization as a whole.
Yep. We have another one here from William. It is how important is vendor experience when you're dealing with a third-party vendor, particularly in handling something as sensitive as employee pay?
So Josh, I'll give this one to you, but I will just say that as with any vendor selection or evaluation, I would think that the experience of the vendor, because you are touching employees of your organization, is very, very important, and it should be a critical part of your decision-making process. Josh, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, our thoughts here at DailyPay would be when you're handling something as sensitive and as important to employees as their pay. When you think about pay, it's really the main employee benefit, right? It is the employee benefit. So, I think going with an experienced vendor who has, experience not only rolling out these programs, but also, kind of administering all the aspects of the program, from the funding to the user interface to the customer support. You want to have a vendor who has experience in all of those areas, working with all of its clients. And so that would be kind of our perspective on that one. Another question we got from Janine is there any consideration that you know of for states to begin requiring daily pay to be available to employees? So this is a question that came up by a few participants. There are no requirements of any states for daily payments to be kind of made. There are requirements in terms of the timing of pay that may state that you have to pay employees within a certain schedule, but in no states is the answer daily. In some states it's monthly or biweekly. We would love a world here at DailyPay where it was mandated for daily pay to be required everywhere, but that there are no requirements. Just to answer your question, Janine. Just looking through the questions we have here, Cheryl is asking, is DailyPay a good fit for a trucking company paying drivers daily? It could be. This is I presume the premise of the question is that currently payroll is being run daily, and in many situations you can kind of use DailyPay as a way to get off of that scenario if your payroll team is so burdened that they are actually running payroll daily. There are also use cases for a daily payment benefit that can reduce payroll advances. This is kind of an administrative burden that we see on a lot of payroll teams. So this product really replaces the need for a lot of those. And because employees can access their earned but unpaid wages before payday, we've seen experience with our partners of eliminating in some cases, or drastically reducing the number of sort of paycheck advances that are being requested of the payroll team. So an interesting use case there for sure. Just looking through some more questions here. We have a question from Bill. He says, what impact will this product have on off-cycle payments? Felicia, did you want to take that, or I'm happy to answer from DailyPay's perspective?
Yeah, I can answer a little bit, and then I'll turn it over to you. I will say that you are definitely better positioned to process off-cycle payments only in the case of an emergency. And so as you define your criteria for off-cycle payments, you should not have to consider advances or anything that would be a hardship to your, or that would give your employees earnings that are not necessarily due to payroll errors. So, and I trust that you all have a good off-cycle policy in place, but really focusing on emergency. Sometimes we forget that off-cycles are intended for emergency payments where the employee cannot wait until the next pay period for a correction. So it kind of drills it down to just in those cases, will you be doing off-cycles?
That's very helpful. And I'm just going to add from DailyPay's perspective that we really see, our experience with off-cycle payments in several ways. One is that with the access to a product that can get earnings before payday, sometimes the need for off-cycle payments can be reduced by implementing a DailyPay benefit. But it is also something that we are hearing from a lot of our payroll partners, and we are certainly kind of hearing that payroll teams need ways to sort of deliver off-cycle payments in a way that is going to get those payments out in a timely manner to their employee forces. So it's an area that we've been actually closely monitoring, and I would think that as time evolves, an on-demand pay platform could be a great way. It could be a great bolt-on feature to an on-demand pay platform to offer those kinds of benefits. I have another question here from Susan, which is, what if I already have a pay card program in place? Do my employees have to get new pay cards? I'll answer that question from DailyPay's perspective. That is not a requirement in DailyPay. So the way that DailyPay works is it will work with your existing pay cards to push payments to those cards if you have them in place already. We don't ask that anyone change their current pay card program. So there are, other on-demand pay platforms that require the use of a card. But just to clarify from DailyPay's perspective, we can pay to any bank account or pay card, and therefore, we don't ask that the employer make any changes. At the same time, if there is a need for a pay card solution, DailyPay can offer that solution alongside. But I don't know if, Felicia, you have any other thoughts on that. I think it was pretty specific to DailyPay, but
yeah, I agree. I agree that.
Just looking through some of the questions we have here. Can this be used for employees outside of the United States? At this time, DailyPay is operating in all 50 states, but not outside of the United States. That's sort of on the product roadmap, so that would be in the future, but not at this time. Just going to pause for a minute while we collect additional questions, and just remind the audience that if you have questions, you can enter them into your GoToWebinar, and we will have a look. Just going to pause for 1 minute while we look for those. Okay, I have a question from Lisa asking for a high-level explanation of how this works, whether the employees have an account with DailyPay or how exactly this works. So, different products will have different, kind of, how it works answers. But for DailyPay, the way it actually works is a DailyPay user will, upon enrollment, will have their direct deposit instructions in the payroll system changed to what we call the DailyPay direct deposit instructions. So that's the sort of main change in the payroll system, is the destination account to which you send payroll funds. So this is really critical for how you ensure compliance with laws in all 50 states, because the characterization of a wage payment is an important consideration when you're structuring a program. So without getting too technical, the way it actually works is you will send funds to these DailyPay direct deposit instructions, which will refund DailyPay for any funds that they have sent in advance of payday. For a more full explanation, we'd be happy to set up further conversations, Lisa. But that's kind of how the overall system works for DailyPay. Another question from Joey: how will the employee get access to this DailyPay? Are we going to run direct deposits every day? So the answer to that is no, Joey. It will be DailyPay who's sending the funds to employees. You won't be sending the direct deposits every day. So we would send either an instant payment, which will reach the user within seconds, or a next day payment. And then, when payday comes around, we will be reimbursed through the ordinary payroll process for any amounts that we've sent out. Another question from Ida: if using DailyPay as a third-party vendor, what is the funding window? How would the employer pay DailyPay? So you actually pay payroll on the ordinary cadence that you would. So as I mentioned, when there's the when you send out the pay to your employees, just for a DailyPay employee, that their direct deposit instructions in the system will be the DailyPay direct deposit instructions rather than their end destination account. And another question from Sally. I think the question is, what types of employees commonly use this benefit? So I think Felicia touched on this earlier. I'll give my thoughts on sort of the DailyPay user base, and then I'll turn it over to Felicia for what she's seeing more broadly. But at DailyPay, we're seeing any large hourly workforce, so food services, quick serve restaurants, a lot in healthcare and caregiving. Any sort of population that has a large hourly workforce has really gravitated towards this benefit. But we are seeing users who are salaried, for example, who are, we have users who make up to six figures. When financial emergencies arise, they can arise for anyone, but you see generally higher adoption rates and a higher gravitation towards this benefit at the lower end of the earning scale and among hourly employees. I don't know, Felicia, if you had any thoughts on that one.
No, I don't have anything to add. I don't have anything to add. Josh?
Sorry, Felicia, I had you on mute for a second.
That's okay. No, I was just saying I didn't have anything to add.
Yeah, one real quick question before we finish is where do you see payroll headed? Where do you see on-demand pay fitting into what payroll teams are doing? And again, any other messages you'd have for the audience today as they consider this new and exciting space?
And I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yes, Felicia. It's just where is payroll headed, and what would you recommend to the audience today and the payroll teams, as they're evaluating this new and exciting benefit?
Yeah, so sorry about that. I would say, as I mentioned before, I think that payroll, and you guys know this, is becoming more and more automated, less transactional, and we need to look for these type of opportunities to really implement in our payroll strategy so that we are creating value for the organization and having a positive influence on the employee experience. So, I think that you will continue to hear things that we're not so comfortable with because we haven't historically done it that way, but we're going to start to hear those things that are really going to make the payroll process more efficient and effective and really have a positive impact on our employee experience, as well as preparing your organization as a whole for the gig economy and really working in an environment that is attractive to millennials.
Wonderful. Well, we've come up on our time for the webinar today. I want to say a big thank you to Josh and Felicia. Thank you both for your time. Thank you, everybody who attended and for your questions. If we didn't get to your question today, we do have your email address, and we'll follow up with you and make sure you have all the information you need. Also, please keep an eye on your email inboxes. We'll be sending around a recording of this webinar as soon as it's ready. Thank you again, everybody, for joining a DailyPay webinar. Keep an eye out for future webinars, and we hope you have a great day. Take care. Bye.